artworks are actually living entities.
I'm thinking, well, you mean metaphorically, but you don't. You mean literally.
I mean literally. I'm obsessed by the idea that you don't need to have any knowledge before you meet an artwork. They get out, get a real Francis Bacon painting, walk through the pub, stick it on the bar stool. Oh, it's on day release. You know, it's stuck in an institution for 60 years. For one day, it gets to choose where it wants to go. And why does it come here? So Easter Island is the remotest inhabited place in the world. And the old narrative was Europeans can sort of like bring back to life this place because it's this denuded landscape. That is the story. But that's not true, right? What actually happens is,
2, 1, rolling.
This is StoryCo, the podcast about the business of story and storytelling. I'm James Kirkham. Let's get into it. My guest today started his career digging holes, not metaphorically, actually digging holes in fields, looking for things. He went on to spend 9 years inside the British Museum as curator of the Americas, make archaeology documentaries for the BBC, excavate 800-year-old settlements on the Cuban coastline, and dismantle one of the most famous environmental collapse stories ever told. Jago Cooper is now executive director of the Sainsbury Centre for Visual Arts. 3 months into that job, he called a staff meeting and told everyone the artworks were alive. He meant it. So much that he took a Francis Bacon painting out for a pint. Jago's argument is that things are better storytellers than people. They don't have an agenda, they don't do PR, and some of them have been alive for a very long time. Jago Cooper, tell me a story.
I was thinking on the way here about a story that sort of tied together storytelling, or how I see storytelling, and I thought back to 2009. I was an academic specialising in the human experience of climate change. And there was a great sense amongst the scientific community because Obama had just got in. There was hope that we were going to sort of solve the problems of climate change. And I was called to a climate change conference in Copenhagen where all the greatest scientists in the world met up to get the latest scientific evidence to hand over to Prime Minister Anders Fogh Rasmussen, the Prime Minister of Denmark, who was then going to take it to the big presidential meetings and discuss the future of climate change. So we were in this conference, very excited. We all feel like we're on the right side of it. We're all there, energetic, and like all the biggest names in science were there. And then at the end of this 4-day conference, we handed over this document to the Prime Minister. And at that meeting, like the Prime Minister got hammered, got absolutely hammered. Everyone was standing up and saying, you know, politicians are useless. They're not doing enough about climate change. We're telling you that the future of humanity is on the brink. And it was in 2009. We could have turned it around. And if you don't do something, Prime Minister, then like we're all going to die. And the Prime Minister got up and gave this amazing speech, which I remember so well, where he got up and was like, look, you know, this is not my fault. I'm a politician. I blow with the wind and I'll do what the people want. This is your fault as the scientific community because no one cares enough about climate change. And it's your fault in this academic world that you get together, you think you're really great, but unless you tell people about what's going on and not only tell them but persuade them that this is actually important in their lives, then I as a politician am never going to change. So it's your fault, not mine. Gosh. And that made me think that as an academic, we still live in these sort of bubbles where we don't communicate actually the importance of what we're doing. And that was a big turning point in how I started thinking about, well, if I'm going to do this sort of work, I need to get better at storytelling.
I love that. I mean, there's quite a lot I want to get into there. The climate bit's a particularly interesting one, though, and we might touch upon it again later, but do you still think stories of climate is wrongly told?
I think that the world has changed since 2009. Back in 2009, I think that more people needed to know about the importance of climate change and understand the seriousness of it. I think that the world now, we've passed the tipping point. So it's not like we can turn this around anymore. Now it's about learning to live with it and being resilient.
We're done.
So the storytelling nature of it has changed. It's not about awareness. It's about like, this is coming down the road. We're going to start living with sudden environmental change in quite a dramatic way. We need to start preparing for it. And that gets you more into resilience and how you think about adapting.
It feels like a lot of people aren't on board with that. I mean, you're saying it in a slightly upbeat tone, but that feels concerning.
Well, it's definitely true. I mean, like, there's no way that humans are going to turn around the current trajectory of human-induced climate change. The world is definitely going to heat by at least 2 degrees, 3 degrees, and the impact of the tipping points that we're currently approaching means that means major sea level rise, huge storms, like major changes to rainfall patterns, and an unequivocal face for humanity, wherever you are on the planet. And that's definitely a done deal now. And so it's now about adaptation.
I'm sure people watching and listening can already tell the kind of stories and show we've got in store for us today. But let's go back to the start. I want you to paint a picture of childhood.
So I just grew up in a very small little village in Gloucestershire. Little village, like just one little post office and a pub. But they had this weird scheme where the local town, which was called Cirencester, they had a great museum, and you could take any object that you found in the ground into the museum, and you hand it over at the front desk, and then you came back a week later, and they would give you a typed report about what this object was, and they were creating a database where every sort of archaeological object was collected in the whole county. And so, as childcare, from the age of sort of 4 or 5, my godmother used to drop me off at the museum in the morning on Saturdays, and I would drop off this object.
Wow.
And then they would like give me back that it was a sheep bone or a little Iron Age like axe or something exciting. And then that's how I started digging holes. And so I started going around the village and digging up holes and got super into archaeology from an extremely early age.
I mean, I'm not surprised you got into archaeology with that going on. How come that didn't happen everywhere? I mean, what a wonderful thing that was.
It's great. It's now called the Portable Antiquities Scheme. So exactly that same concept is now applied to the British Museum, where it's called the Portable Antiquities Scheme, which like metal detectorists find gold and they sort of report it, and then they put it up into a national scheme, and that creates the database by which all sort of archaeological objects are sort of recorded in the county system. And it's a great system, and it does get you enthused, and it got me enthused. And then I went on my first sort of organised archaeological excavation, like with a university-based team, when I was 8 years old.
Really, when you were 8?
Yeah.
And go on, what did that feel like? Did that feel like, yep, I'm 100% on the right track, this is for me?
So definitely, for me, like archaeology and art and all forms of materialisation of human culture, when you find something or see something, you're literally connecting with that other human being. And you're seeing the world through a completely different cultural perspective. And I just love that. I love that sense of discovery and that sense of understanding that, like, the world is seen in different ways by different people. And I think particularly because I started as a kid, I was trying to work out about the world and work out what the hell was going on, and I was still formulating how I saw the world, and therefore seeing it through the eyes of other cultures, I've always found absolutely amazing.
Well, an archaeologist, perhaps, as you find different components and parts of things, I guess there's something there that you're rearranging or assembling bits of broken story. But you clearly loved wanting to explore more, right? That was in you.
Yeah, definitely. And also talking about parents, my mum was an artist, and so
really?
I, since that time, like 3 or 4, I've never seen a difference between a painting and a broken ceramic from 200 years ago. Like, I see them both as materializations of human culture, and I've literally never seen a difference.
Go on, expand that more, because that is interesting, because most people would see quite the distinction.
So basically, as humans, we sort of have this thing around us called nature, and we sort of manipulate bits of it and turn it into things, and we sort of make things out of this sort of natural world. And that process of creation, for me, gives you clues to people, and it goes to the sort of essence of who humans actually are. And therefore, that is what I've always seen it as. And just because, and so now I'm an academic, right? So I teach, I'm a professor of art, and I'm a professor of archaeology, and there's a whole world of language around art and art history and archaeology and anthropology, and I can speak in those different languages, but in reality, they're all the same thing. They're all about humans understand the world, and these materializations are a sort of mechanism by which you can understand that.
See, I adore that, and I've never thought about them grouped in the way that you're describing. And again, perhaps my ignorant stance would be that the archaeological piece is very much about finding, discovering, and then learning about a time which once was. And as I'm saying it, I'm seeing why you're seeing it so joined up. Whereas, and I went to art college, and I have an appreciation of painting per se and the ability, frankly, for people to draw. But I guess I saw that very much as their output from their brain, inspired by something to make something. In other words, there felt like a delineation.
But the tradition of painting goes back, right? They're all historic processes. Like, why was the brush created? Who was the first person to create the oil paints? Like, this tradition of it.
I kind of want to know those answers now. I dare say you've got those answers.
Well, I mean, this is it. They're all part of tradition. Like, we don't suddenly appear out of nowhere. We're part of these cultures which all date back in time. And therefore, each object has a historicity to it, even if it's created now. And therefore, they are connected. And therefore, I genuinely just don't see a difference between archaeology and art. I don't see a difference.
Do many people think like you do on that one?
No. I think people find it resistant if they are an art historian or if they're an archaeologist, because they're like, no, I've spent my life learning to be brilliant in this field and know the history of this field. And now you're saying it's exactly the same as that other field, then I'm feeling a bit sort of like, I don't know, threatened by this.
So you think that's what it is? It comes down to their own personal time spent with the subject matter.
Yeah, and also that they've become really good at it, and therefore they
Sure.
and therefore they don't want it to be so completely like, what do you mean? Of course, it's not like art. Like I don't know, I'm an archaeologist, not an art person.
Yeah.
But I think that once you actually think about it, then you're like, well, of course, human materialization is connecting across time and space, and every single human community that's ever been created creates art, right? They all create art, and just because the art is old doesn't make it any different.
I love that. Yeah. I used to have an argument with my dad because he had an appreciation of art and paintings, but more like Turner, for example, which is absolutely understandable for probably a man of his age. And I know when I was kind of I went to art college in, what would that be, the end of the 90s, and it was very much the Brit art and Tracy Emin and Damien Hirst. And where he would be like, I just don't get it. I said, yeah, but if you go and look at Damien Hirst's sketchbook, probably at the age of 18, let alone 20, you'll think it's bloody brilliant. But they have chosen to now seek a route of a product of an output of art to inspire or excite or disrupt. But in other words, it still stems from that latent ability, which I think everyone recognises. Is that kind of true across the board?
So I like your dad is exactly representative of most people.
Right.
Like, I don't know art. I can't look at this. And that is the problem with creating these sort of barriers of giving these things disciplines and names. Right. And therefore, as a museum director of an art museum, I'm obsessed by the idea that you don't need to have any knowledge before you meet an artwork, right? You can have a relationship with it in an own way. And what we've been working on is a way of actually like activating that and making it real. Because otherwise, if you feel like there's a certain way you have to do it, or there's a certain knowledge you have to have before you meet the painting, then you're never, it's always going to be a barrier. You're always going to feel slightly awkward. Like so many people feel like in a museum you have to sort of look clever and stroke your chin and look knowledgeable and then read the label and nod and then like, how do I behave? And like that's the worst thing about art or archaeology is like, no. Getting in touch with other human beings and other cultures and other ways of being it's about a journey of looking inside yourself and feeling the emotions, and that is something you don't know training for.
Such a good point. That feels quite a British self-consciousness, but I presume that's everyone.
I think all museums, maybe it's the influence of European museum traditions, but of course everyone feels self-conscious in those environments. You should feel like you should know more than you do.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't go to museums. They don't feel comfortable walking across the threshold. They feel it's like an authority. It's a space they don't feel comfortable with. They're not interested in it. And that's a killer because they're not getting access to like unbelievable knowledge and imagination and ideas and thoughts about the world.
And we've got to segue into it because we need to get into yours and how you came to be. You think things are better storytellers than people, right? Objects and things, full stop. That's kind of a premise, right?
Yeah. So I've spent my entire life working in and around museums and culture, and spent some time in a lot of very traditional museums. I spent like almost a decade at the British Museum with a very traditional sense. That? It was great. Loved the British Museum. Did loads of really cool projects. Great thing about working at the British Museum is it's easy to raise money because like everyone wants to come into the British Museum for a visit. You can meet rich people, get money, do really exciting projects. Work with Google, set up a new research centre, doing really amazing projects in Latin America. But the concept of the museum was sort of stuck in history and like all these things I'm talking about how you break down these barriers, get people to enjoy collections in different ways, you couldn't do it. And the problem was that the foundation of the museum concept is that art or a collection is property, that this stuff is essentially property. And in the case of the British Museum, it belongs to the nation, and you get privileged access as a member of the public to stuff you wouldn't normally see, and they look after it and care for it. And that's a great model. Like, I like museums. It's great that people get access to stuff that they wouldn't normally see. But it has a couple of flaws in it as a model. The first is it means that there's an authority that's going to tell you how to experience this collection when you walk through any museum. And that's quite a barrier. People don't like that. Exactly what we were talking about. It's quite awkward. What do I do? How do I go in there? The second problem is if it's about ownership, how do you justify owning other people's stuff? If that's the reason you exist, how do you justify owning Parthenon marbles or Benin bronzes, like these controversial things? Is that really how you want to set yourself up as why you exist as an institution? And the third, and another one we touched on, is like what actually is art and material culture? If we understand them as these sort of like inanimate paintings that sort of tell stories about history, then it denies the emotional power of what art and material culture actually is. So when I was at the British Museum, I came up with a sort of different model for the the museum, a different way of thinking about them. And that, when the job came up at the Sainsbury Centre, I was like, if there's one place in the world we could have a go at doing something totally radical, it's the Sainsbury Centre, because it was an art museum that in the 70s was properly radical.
Yeah, explain to people perhaps the Sainsbury Centre, where it is and a little bit about that.
So the Sainsbury Centre is the best art museum in the world.
Come on.
It's got this super cool Norman Foster designed building, which is also the Avengers headquarters. That's where it was filmed. So beautiful.
Didn't realise that.
Yeah, beautiful gleaming bit of silver architecture, stunning in the Norfolk countryside. Inside is one of the best art collections in the world, which marries like Tate Modern meets British Museum.
Amazing.
And it has this open span sort of area where you walk in and you walk like you change your choreography. You walk amongst artworks, nothing's on the wall, but in these three-dimensional space where you'll get an ancient Polynesian fish hook opposite a Pablo Picasso, which is next to a Jamon ceramic from 6,000 years ago, opposite a Modigliani painting, next to a new contemporary work by a great young artist who just graduated out of art school. And so it's like a cultural dialogue across time and space in which you explore the nature of humanity through this diverse portfolio of materializations. And it definitely bridges art, archaeology, and anthropology.
What a brilliant explanation that is. Tell me about those juxtapositions that you're describing, because that does feel novel. The fish hook opposite the Picasso. Is there still story connecting those items?
So in the 70s, when it was first created as a concept, like Bob and Lisa, whose first collection was, they didn't believe that hierarchy of art existed based on where it was made. Like a European painting wasn't better than a Japanese ceramic just because it was European. Like the power of art was the power of the emotion within the object. And if it was powerful, it didn't matter who made it or where it came from. You just sort of felt that emotional power. And so the logic was you had this sort of relationship based on it. And Bob would say when he was collecting, like he could never explain why something was
really
and it didn't. And he met like Francis Bacon, Henry Moore, Giacometti, built relationships with these people, but he could never explain why certain paintings, why these certain artists. And then he created this collection based on emotion. And then he went to the University of Cambridge to offer them the collection in the early 1970s. And Cambridge was like, well, that's proper art. That's a Picasso. We're not going to take the Bacons. That's degenerate. He didn't go to art school. That's ethnic material.
Didn't take the Bacons.
That goes into the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology. And Bob and Lisa were like, no, that's not true. Like the art doesn't have a hierarchy. Like great art is great art.
I also just love the way Francis Bacon's just thrown
exactly.
out, discarded.
Well, he never went to art school. He wasn't like, trained by the right people. And therefore they were like, no. So they went off and went to probably the second best art museum in the world, which is the Louisiana in northern Denmark, met the founder of that called Knut Jensen, and he gave them some great advice, which was build your own museum, and the secret is don't talk to anyone who actually works in the museum world. Just build your own thing. So they found Norman Foster, another guy called Ko Liang Yi, and created a different type of museum that had an equal platform for all forms of human materialization across time and space. And so when I was looking to create a new radical concept for the world of museums, I could go to that group of trustees and say, look, this place was properly radical in the 70s. I've got this quite radical idea. We should sort of capture radicality and reinform it in the 21st century.
That's very now. I love the idea that these environments and these spaces are built more around that now, that, as you say, the ridding of the hierarchy, or certainly the rulings like, well, he didn't go to art school, so he can't be on in the top tier, which is insane, and I'd never heard that before. Yeah. But that feels a really modern kind of take that most people should be down with, actually, as a consequence of recent sort of tech and life.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the dream of digital and tech, is that it gives you an empowerment to find whatever it is you want to find. I think the reality of the digital world is actually the increased algorithmic structure of it is that you're being much more channeled than you actually ever thought you were. And what you're actually seeing is not as free and open and democratic and freely accessible as you thought. But in our museum, it definitely is. And there is no wrong or right piece of artwork. You come in, it's almost like a labyrinth that you walk through, and you're invited to find anything that you feel just speaks to you, anything that you find that catches your eye. And for me, it's exactly the same as when you walk into a crowd of people. You're out clubbing or you're going to some event and you walk in and you can't tell why it is that someone is someone you want to get to know. Sometimes you stood next to them in a Coke queue, other times they catch your eye across the dance floor, and then by developing that relationship, you go up to them and sort of ask them questions about themselves, you get to know each other, and that human-to-human relationship can be totally mirrored in a materialization of humanity through an animate object, because it's a way of investing in a sort of human-to-human relationship, and then the artwork becomes a mechanism by which you can do that. And so I see exactly parallels between humans and art in that way of meeting things in your own terms.
Gosh, that's nice. So you plan, for example, in spaces Do you assume people will go left rather than right, or they'll go straight on? Like, how much do you care about that versus the natural gravity that the art object has?
So we definitely deliberately try to empower the natural pathway. I mean, when we do exhibitions, we have a particular theme or question we're trying to explore, but we definitely want to empower people and have that sort of freedom that there's definitely no right or wrong and that anything you can speak to. And for me, the definition of good art is that when you find that relationship, good art is art that if you invest in it, as in invest your time or whatever is the mechanism, we create the mechanisms to do it, then it gives you back. It gives you back inspiration, it gives you back ideas, it gives you back space to explore the biggest questions you've got in your life. That is the definition of good art, just like it is good relationships with people. It's like if you invest in them, you get stuff out of it. And that is the secret to art. Tell
me, you mentioned the British Museum, and 10 years, was it? Yeah. You were there. Is that quite the juxtaposition again, but in terms of the establishment of what that was and how that was versus something like the Sainsbury Centre now? Is that quite the contrast?
It's the ultimate contrast in between two museums. They could not be more different. I mean, the question that the British Museum is trying to answer is what are the origins of Western civilization? And who are these cultures in other parts of the world? It's culture history. Things are organised by where they came from and what year they're in.
Do you believe they are trying to answer that? In other words, is there enough done to seek those true answers?
So the realisation I had when I worked at the British Museum was that unless you broke the model of understanding the collection as property, you could never truly break the model of the whole museum. And that's why you had to completely defibrillate the concept of what a museum is. And so, yes, you can do lots of window dressing. I did great exhibitions on climate change at the British Museum, did really fun things on really interesting shows, did loads of digital projects, but they were always surfacely nice, but the inner core couldn't change until you radically reconceptualized for every visitor who came in what they were actually doing. And if they felt like they were just getting privileged access to other people's stuff, then they could never really break down. So over the last 5 years at the Sainsbury Centre, we have totally changed that experience.
You've mentioned a couple of times this word, or these words, privileged access, very much that kind of velvet rope around the artwork. You're lucky this is here for a period of time, then it goes back to whatever family or whatever place. That start point is always going to be problematic or butt up against this notion of complete sort of feeling-led, need-led access to all sort of approach that you're describing that you do now, right?
Yes. So basically, the radical concept that we introduced was that if you're not going to understand it as property, if you're not going to understand the collection as property, then what is art? What actually is art, right? And for me, there is something totally unique about being a human being. When we're a kid, we sort of realise that inside us is this sort of thing, right? There's a thing which is James, and contained within your body of flesh and bone, which gets old and eventually dies, this thing is contained. And it doesn't matter what word you use. You could use words soul or spirit or consciousness, doesn't matter because you know you got it. And as a human being, you become unbelievably skilled at meeting other human beings. And when you build relationships with people, family, friends, people you fall in love with, this connection happens where that raw essence of who you are connects in a way you can't describe with other human beings. This is what sculpts the person you are, your value systems, what you think is right and wrong, your judgments, how you talk, everything about you. For me, great artists, makers and creators are people who have an ability to channel that raw essence of human energy. Nice. And in the case of it, they're putting their hands through clay into a clay vessel. They're putting it through the brush onto art. And at that moment, this anima transfers into this and it becomes a living entity. This is a living human entity. It's not a human being because it doesn't have a human body, but it's still imbued with exactly the same life force of humans. And artworks are actually living entities. So we are the first museum in the world to change our governance structure of our museum. So we understand the collection as living entities, and the job of our board and every member of staff who works there is to give these living entities their best lives. And every visitor who comes to our museum at the front desk is told, we understand the collection as being alive. You're here to meet them much more like you would another human being than you would an inanimate object. And we've created a whole series of ways to facilitate the nature of that relationship for you.
I'm thinking, well, you mean metaphorically, but you don't. You mean literally.
I mean literally.
When you told everyone this theory for the first time, what was the reaction? What was the reaction of the staff in the museum? Were they down with that?
So I was there for 4 months saying, we're going to be friendly, we're going to be lovely place to work. And then after 4 months, called everyone in, sat them in the collection and gave them 2 hours on this.
2 hours?
And at the end of it, they were just like, what on earth is going on? And then a brilliant member of staff called Kate put her hand up and she was like, so basically what you're saying is, it's a little bit like the middle of the 20th century when everyone started to realise that zoos were a really bad idea. And I'm like, that is exactly what I'm saying.
I like that.
I'm saying that art was never created with the idea that it would be given an arbitrary name and shoved in a room with other things with our surrealist or Iron Age, and that actually each one of these things is an animate entity that wants to connect and storytell and build relationships on just the same questions that all of us have as humans. And what we need to do is liberate them and free them and allow people to explore those questions through their relationship with art. And what is great is that art is better than humans for exploring many of the questions.
In what way? As in, they don't come with preconceived notions or chips on their shoulders or biases.
So a couple of ways is that whenever we meet another human being, we want to be liked, right? So we present a version of ourselves that we want to be liked. We're not actually being totally true and authentic. We're creating a version of ourselves. Whereas with an artwork, when you meet it, you can be totally truthful and raw and honest and explore the big questions you've got without trying to impress the artwork, because you can trust it. So in our museum, you can, like, for example, you can lie down on a chaise longue underneath a Giacometti painting of his brother Diego horizontally suspended above you. And you're asked to tell the painting a secret that you would never tell any other human being.
This is great.
Because you can trust the painting to hold the secret. So when you come into a gallery, you've seen people sharing their absolute innermost secrets that they would never tell another human being, because they can trust the painting and they can explore that thought, and the museum can become a safe space to explore the biggest questions you've got in your life in a way that you can genuinely think about. And that then also goes out into the big questions of humanity and life and the future and climate change. And then that is what makes a museum super exciting and interesting.
I mean, beyond exciting and interesting, your space becomes something hugely important beyond a bunch of shelves and a few blank walls, right?
100%. And I think in our current world, we're finding it harder and harder to do the human-to-human bit of it. Like, we're so on tech, or we're doing things, like the time we actually have to spend to like work on ourselves, that like inner life force that we have within ourselves, we become siloed, we don't get contact, we don't have many people to talk to. So the museum becomes even more needed to actually genuinely look inside yourself and decide what it is that makes you who you are. Like, what actually are you living for? Like, why do I do my job? Who am I with? All these big questions you've got. Like, we increasingly need spaces to do that with different divergent views on that question to help us change where we're going.
I think culturally it's particularly interesting. It's reminiscent, but hopefully an awful lot better, of post-COVID, where people are so sick of scrolls and people are flocking actually towards physical spaces. So whether it be brand environments needing to anchor people, give people emotion, there's a fantastic kind of rebirth of old media and physical. Are you seeing a positive uplift in terms of footfall, perhaps aligning or coinciding or as a consequence of this time?
So May 2023 was the big moment where we announced to the public for the very first moment, everything's alive, and we switched over, and that would like, I was genuinely like, this could go completely pear-shaped.
Did you think that?
I was genuinely worried, because I thought, because there's a danger that people think it's like a marketing gimmick or you're trying to do it for publicity. But since that moment, like, our visitor numbers have increased by more than 50%.
Oh, wow.
We're up to now 1.17 million visitors to our museum and sculpture park. Like, we have like got really good validation from people's experiences within the space that this is genuinely meaningful for them. And all of that footfall is driven by word of mouth recommendation.
That's brilliant.
Because we don't have
There's
any marketing
nothing
budget. We haven't got any marketing budget, so therefore we rely on people to tell people, oh my God, I went into this museum, I got into this glass exhibition case where I had to lock the door behind me, and then hanging from the ceiling were all these artworks looking at me. And they were just looking at me in this case, and I couldn't help but feel what they were thinking about me. Like, we create these experiences which are memorable and affecting. So yeah, footfall's done really, really well.
Well, it's just you've innovated and pioneered within museum spaces digitally, but is tech a threat, or can you continue to leverage it in a way to even enhance these experiences further?
So I knew when I arrived at the museum that I wanted to understand our collections being living entities, and that ends up changing everything about the museum. So we now have a Venn diagram of 3 circles. First circle is a creative agency, where everyone's job who works there is to help people explore the biggest questions they've got in their lives by building relationships with these living entities, right? To give these living entities the best lives, you have to come up with the best ideas for how you activate the relationships with them to explore the questions. So that's a creative agency, and everyone's job's that. The second circle is what I call a media company. It's like, when you come up with these creative ideas, we need to then communicate those ideas out into the world. An exhibition is one form of media, but so too is a podcast or a video or a short form film or a lecture. So they're the media companies, like, how do we come up with ideas to take this out of the creative agency and then communicate them with the world? And that media company is what I'm really working on at the moment, and just trying to get the money and getting it going, is like, how do you actually communicate, like, through physical experience and media? So that's where day release, prison van pulls up outside the Sainsbury Centre. 2 probation officers get out, walk into the museum, take some objects, shove them in the back of the prison van, drives through the busy streets of Soho, pulls up outside the pub in Soho. They get out, get a real Francis Bacon painting, walk through the pub, stick it on the bar stool.
No,
it's like,
come
what the
on.
hell's going on? It's like, oh, it's on day release. You know, it's stuck in an institution for 60 years. Like, for one day, it gets to choose where it wants to go. It's like, well, why does it come here? It's like, well, because Francis used to drink in here all the time with Peter, his
That's
lover,
lovely.
who's the guy in the painting. And they, why they're here? Oh, they were gay. It was Soho. And the clever thing about it is that it gets into a discussion about how the life force, like the essence of that life force of that painting, how society has changed since it's been locked up. So at the time, there's this guy who's crying by the bar, and he's like, oh, what's going on? It's like, oh, I've broken up with my boyfriend. And the painting's like, well, what are you bloody complaining about? Like, it was illegal to be gay about 4 years ago, and now you're absolutely fine.
So cool.
So it's playing on the idea of like empowering an artwork to have this agency that can genuinely transform how you think about society. And so that turns into a short form film, and then that film sits on the website or goes out on our social media. So that is digital, and it's a form
Absolutely.
of media, but it's embedded in this concept of the living art. And therefore tech can be brilliant, but the authenticity of the narrative and why you're doing it has to be solid and well formed.
I wasn't expecting you to give the answer that you've effectively created an agency-based ecosystem, a creative agency and a media agency. I mean, that is staggering to me and quite brilliant. So when I query, as I often do, the seismic impact, say, of AI, but intelligence sat in your pocket that's supposedly engineered to know you better than you know yourself is inherently a one-to-one process. And I find that quite encouraging because I think it might rise or cause the rebirth and revival and rise of the crazy artist types who never wanted to be on 360 cameras and be plastered everywhere. I have hope that the AI will enable that and help that. And I'm wondering if what you're saying, there's something there too. I love this notion of the one-to-one that I feel has been forgotten outside of spaces like yours for a decade, with everyone desperately just getting likes on Instagram, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but I think that one-to-one is it. It's about there's that humanness, that human relationship. And I think that, you know, the explosion of people who have AI-based like guides in their life or girlfriends and boyfriends in their life, like it's filling that void for nature. And I think that AI as a mechanism to animate and give voice to a living entity in an artwork
That's
is really
interesting.
interesting, right? The AI can actually facilitate the creation of actual voice into these things. And therefore you want to root the nature of that one-to-oneness, not in an algorithmic-based construct of like all parts of the world and all parts of culture, having scraped the entire planet and created it. You want to circumscribe and create a bespoke identity based on the actual life experience of one individual living artwork. And then that is quite an interesting mechanism. And then you could take that relationship that you form in the museum and then keep it in your pocket and then develop that relationship
That's
over time
nice.
and invest in it. And then the AI in imaginative future worlds could help formulate the nature of that relationship by giving voice and anima
That makes sense.
or life or mechanism to something which doesn't have a human voice and a human body. It has an artistic body.
It makes tons of sense. You said when you sort of first popped up and it was the 2-hour meeting and everyone looked slightly puzzled. But what about the wider kind of art space? Was there resistance?
Do you know what the truth is? The truth is, because we're outside of London, no one cares. Like the art world is so London-centric and so within a bubble. Like no one cares. No one needs to notice. It's also why we were able to do it, because no one could object
That's
to it
nice.
or create the critique before it actually launched. So the honest answer is, because we're outside of London in our own place, like no, we're not a threat to anyone. You know, people can just ignore
That's
us,
good.
and therefore we can just do it. And therefore people are genuinely quite friendly about it. They're like,
Yeah,
oh, that's
yeah.
interesting. You know, these are interesting. You know, that's fun. It's not like a threat to me. Like, you're not stealing my visitors from my museum.
So that's good. So it's
And
allowed
therefore-
to have an organic word of mouth growth by the
and
people.
and I think the art and museum world is pretty tolerant. And then locally in Norfolk, like around us, like unbelievably supportive community. You know, really cool art scene, loads of great artists,
And
loads of
proud, I assume,
studios.
of-
I don't know, just supportive. They're like,
Nice. But now, therefore, that you're well on the sort of journey and you're seeing the numbers that you are, kind of what's next for you specifically around this? Is it a constant case of refreshing, reviving new ideas?
So there's two aspects to it. One, I love the living art concept and it really works, so I want to take it international. Like, we have a really international collection and I want to take that
Nice.
experience, I want to take these living entities and I want them to go off around the world. And so I want to take the living art concept on tour and take it to different
amazing.
international art museums around the world, like Korea and Ghana
Wow.
and Honolulu, and then take it off around the world to sort of have that idea of the model of the museum and try and change it. So, you know, the British Museum founded in 1753.
Wow.
Like, what could a new museum like, and how could we inspire a different type of museum museum around the world. So that is one thing.
Would an endpoint be that every museum is a living museum and recognised as such, or do you think no, it still needs to be distinct and the others are fine and I haven't got an issue?
Yeah, I think there's so many museums. There's tens of thousands of museums in Britain and Europe alone, and therefore the diversity is great. And I'm not like, I don't care how everyone else does theirs. I like the more the merrier. But I feel like the living art one is so successful as a mechanism. I want people to have it as an option on the table when they're thinking about new museums or updating old museums in their own countries. And I like the fact that it has this cross-cultural, cross-temporal feel to it that animates a world and helps them explore big questions. Another consequence of this change, which I hadn't anticipated in the future, was that, everyone was like, well, what exhibitions are we going to do? If they're all alive, what do they want to talk about? The last thing they want to do is a bloody exhibition on like post-impressionism. And so now what we do at the museum is we reach out and ask people like, what are the most important questions that you have in your life? We reach out on social media, like nothing to do with art, like
That's
what are genuinely the most important questions you've got in your life? Then we take one question and then we spend 6 months with a completely different approach to museum programming to activate how we can develop this relationship with these living entities to explore this question. So over the last couple of years, we've done Why Do I Take Drugs? 6 months exploring drugs addiction. We've done 6 months on what is truth, it's like incredible. AI, fake news, what's going on. We've just finished 6 months on how do we stop people killing each other, looking at global conflict and interpersonal violence.
It's amazing.
And so
the art changes accordingly and evolves accordingly in its position and its placement within the space.
Well, not only the permanent collection, but it's a massive museum, huge. And so we normally have 4 or 5 completely separate temporary exhibitions where we bring artworks in from the Louvre or from the Met or the Quai Branly. We do work with an contemporary artist and do an artist in residency, and then we have totally different artistic perspectives on it. So with our current question, we have what is the meaning of life? So a nice small
casual question.
Yeah, so we've got an amazing show upstairs by Libby Heaney, who's an amazing artist, came for residency, and she's created an artwork which is a multiverse where you walk inside the artwork and meet a version of yourself living in a parallel universe where you didn't meet your partner, you didn't get that job, and you're living in a parallel universe, and then you have a conversation with them to decide if their life or your life is better. So like that is how art helps you explore what is the meaning of life. Downstairs we have a show called The Rule, which is a big show. It's a cross-temporal comparison between the 13th century Benedictine order of monastic life in the UK and contemporary art. And so we've got like works from Ely Cathedral and then also A-list contemporary artists, and it's saying that in the 13th century the rules of how to live life were very clear in the Benedictine order. You pray 5 times a day, you eat in this order, you flagellate yourself, you do your Christian stuff. Now, who sets the rules by which we know how to give meaning to our life? So you go around that show and you write down what are the rules by which I try to find meaning in my life? And you write them on a wall at the end to like talk to people about it. So each time these artworks are coming in and they're providing you a way of getting the big question, what is the meaning of life? And then biting off a bit of it, be they rules, play, joy, parallel universes, and then you sort of explore it by developing these relationships with the artworks to get completely different ideas, inspirations, imaginations about that question.
You are blowing my mind in your description. It's so outstanding. It has that both sense of wonder but learning all wrapped into one, which is basically what it's all about, right?
It is. So every school kid in Norfolk probably comes to the museum,
I bet.
And like lots of curators from most other museums around Europe or the UK have now come down to visit to get ideas. But like we rely on things like this to get the word out because we don't have a marketing budget, and therefore, people who come, it's genuinely different, and that is why it's good.
But if people can tap into it in such a educational way, like tapping into this level of, I don't know if you call it almost invisible learning, but the fact that it's done in such a beautiful, natural form in the way that you're describing it feels so fantastic to educate.
Yeah.
With a slight gear change, because I've always been, since I was probably a kid, slightly obsessed, I want to ask you a little bit about Easter Island. It's something that's always fascinated me. Give me your thoughts, perspective, background, why the hell you know anything about it at all, and a little bit of that, because I can't let you come in here and not talk about Easter Island.
So I've done loads of field work all around the world, spent a lot of time on field work, and I've worked in a lot of very diverse places. First worked in Rapa Nui in 2010, and so this was this idea of like, how do we start doing storytelling in different ways? And then I started making documentaries for the BBC, and then each one I was thinking about like, what are the aspects of this human story that you want to tell? And in Rapa Nui, Easter Island, there was an existing narrative that I wanted to basically take apart, and that was written by like Jared Diamond and others.
Did you know you wanted to take it apart right from the start? Was it something that you...
So when I did the field work, and met people, I was like, oh my God, this story is just completely wrong.
It's not adding
like, it's
up.
not wrong. If you look at the academic science, like, this isn't true.
And explain to us perhaps the story that felt wrong versus the version that you thought was right.
So Easter Island is the remotest inhabited place in the world. It's like an isolated island in the middle of the Pacific, which is like 3,000 miles to the next nearest inhabited place. It's like very isolated.
Hard to imagine for those
Very
of you who
isolated. Humans arrived there around sort of like 500 years ago, and the old narrative was humans arrive, they chop down all the trees, they destroy the environment because the humans are homo devastans, we just destroy everything we touch, and then they're all down. And then the Europeans turn up in 1788 or whatever it was, and they find this sort of denuded population, poor them, and Europeans can sort of like bring back to life this place because it's this denuded landscape. That is the story, and it's a sort of metaphor for humans destroying the wider planet, that we come arrive at places, we destroy everything, and then we need to find, get Elon Musk to take us to another planet to survive. But that's not true, right? What actually happens is the humans arrived on this island and developed the most ingenious technologies imaginable to adapt to a very difficult environment in incredibly clever ways. They created different agricultural systems called manavai, where they built with stone walls that protected it from the high winds and created loads of crops. They created these stone gardens. But to European eyes, these landscapes weren't green fields full of like agriculture. They were these sort of rocky landscapes, and they couldn't realise that these were very, very successful populations.
Amazing.
And the Rapa Nui population is still alive. They still live on the island. Like, they didn't all die out. They're totally fine. And the thing that killed them was smallpox, bringing in with the Europeans. The Europeans taking them all up and turning them into slaves and taking them off into Peru. And sheep, dropping sheep off on the island that destroyed all the nice indigenous crops and denuded the landscape and led to soil erosion. So actually it was European arrival that created the tipping point in the planet with translocated ways of living and understanding nature that were not applicable to this particular part of the world. And that is the lesson, that you shouldn't transpose good ways of living in certain parts of the world on not the right ways of living in other parts of the world. So stop taking them and dropping them off. And that is the problem with the planet.
Yeah, like societal gentrification. When you're putting out theses, ideas, understanding like that, do you get resistance minute one, or are people willing to embrace?
Yeah, TV, you go into the public forums, you get loads of people saying,
So you expect it.
Obviously Rapa Nui was created by aliens. I mean, like, you're in the public forums, so there's loads
Got
of
it.
But which I liked, though. I really liked that.
Do you care about what's said?
I don't read it, to be honest.
Really?
And same with the museum.
That's interesting.
I actually don't read any of the
That's
articles about it.
impressive.
I have someone in the media team who reads it, and I'm like,
Filters it. Yeah. Any good stuff this week?
Yeah, I was like, is it good or is it bad? And she's like, yeah, it's not good. Or it's great.
But that's quite the
And
discipline.
then I don't read it, because otherwise I just know. And so the same with TV stuff, I just didn't read it. And also, I'm quite sensitive, I suppose. Like, if I'd read it, I'd get really upset.
No, but I can empathise. But it's a classic thing. Like, I'll read 1,000 comments, and the one that'll stick with me will be the negative one.
Exactly. I think that's every human being. And if you want to do fun things and do interesting things, you gotta break some eggs, and therefore you've got to have a system in place that allows you to get through.
Agree. But when did you first know that? Because you feels like you've done that in a space massively, and the nature of the disruption feels like...
Well, a massive thing is I've never been on social media in my life. Like, I didn't enjoy MySpace, Facebook. I've never been on anything. I've never had an account. So I spend a lot of time on human-to-human contact with friends and people I see, and like see people, and therefore I get feedback from them. So when I was doing the TV stuff, it was actually a turning point in the career, because they were like, you have to develop a personality. You know, you have to have an online presence, you have to have followers. If you don't have that, then you can't be a real presenter, because you have to bring, 5 million people who follow you.
Did you resent that?
I rejected it because I was like, I don't want to be a full-time broadcaster. Like, I'm a culture person, not a broadcaster person, and therefore I don't want to go onto social media for it. Same as my museum. Like, I hire a company, and like they would give me advice, and they were like, you as an individual museum director have to have a social media account in order to get this idea out into the world about living art. And I was like, I see your argument, but I'm just not going to do it. And I think the museums could be those spaces where you switch off from all of that stuff, and you have these.
Do you think they might be the last bit? I worry about. I've always said that I worry about pubs are going to become like. I don't mean this in a disparaging way, but I used to say pubs would be more like museums. Like, you might get the odd one. The point is, I worry about their decline. And I used to say, look, it'll be a thing you travel to. But maybe there's a preserve here that is kind of counterproductive, or rather that will ultimately be advantageous to spaces like yours, where people cherish them properly again, not just expect them to be around like we've perhaps always had done.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert in this because I'm not a social media person, so I don't know it that well. But for me, people crave the human to human. And
Absolutely.
what the tech does is it gives you a sort of false a full saccharine, highly sugarized version of the human to human. But after a while, you realize it's not true. It's playing with the same emotions of like love or hate or disgust or anger. And it's like sparking them, which are real human emotions. But what happens is they become ephemeral, they're distant, they don't go, they don't swirl around. Whereas genuine human emotion, when you meet someone in the pub and genuinely talk about football or genuinely talk about the current conflict, that's deeper and more meaningful. And I think that people will realise that.
I've always thought at an atomic level it is down to oscillation, like it's actual vibration, and some people's vibrations you perfectly match and others you jar with. What you described earlier is that you said it could be spirit, but it's the essence of you coming back into your art that carries that, or I think you said it carries it from its maker, from the origins, from the hands that created, which I'm adoring. When you then go and you talked about your 6-month season, if you like, do you have to act like editor-in-chief? Do you go and bespoke handpick these items, artefacts, pieces of art that have that feeling?
The answer to the question is yes, there is genuine magic to how those artworks are created and imbued with this force, and you can't put your fingers on it. And it's exactly the same between like why you connect with certain human beings and why you don't. It's the same with art.
Love that.
And therefore, yes, not me, but the curators who work for me have to go out and find artworks that genuinely connect on this question. So we have a very different approach to programming to every other museum.
Go on.
So most museums, you have curators who are world experts in something, and you do a surrealist show or a show on Picasso, and you have the world expert on Picasso, and their job as a curator is to impart their incredible knowledge into bite-sized chunks that these simple public people can understand, and they know the right paintings. That's how it works. But if the question is, what is truth? How can we stop people killing each other? Like, there is no expert who knows all the answers to that, right? So what we do is we create a think-in where we invite into a think-in, like 3 years before we start the 6 months, like the greatest minds of academics. We have artists, have activists, we have community leaders, we have people working on this on the ground, on drug addiction or conflict or interpersonal violence. We gather everyone into the room and we're like, right, guys, this is the question we want to explore, and we create a think-in, and then the curator's job...
How long is a think-in, by the way?
So it's about an hour or two, and then they've taken different formats. Sometimes you get little speakers to give inspirational ideas, and then everyone responds. And then out of that, we ask people to write on a piece of paper, like, right, what's the pitch? How much space do you need in the museum? Like, what's the artwork you want to work with? Where's it going to come from? How's that going to turn into something actually physically real for people to then experience? And then the curators have to create these shows which are completely bespoke. Like, lots of museums just take a Grace and Perry show and drop it in. Like, these shows are completely built from scratch, totally different. So how can we stop killing each other? We had a little show called Eyewitness, which was a cross-cultural comparison on how people are obsessed by watching violence, from Kabuki in Japan to Grand Theft Auto, and it was like this whole show exploring this. So each show is totally unique, and it's an enormous amount of work for the people in the museum.
Did you say 3 years prior?
Hopefully you have 5-year lead-in time for exhibitions.
5 years?
But so we had very short lead-in times when we changed the programme, and now we've got about 3-year lead-in times we're working on.
Even the fact that you say 3-year lead-in time is short.
Yeah, that is
counter to modern life.
It takes at least a year to get anything loaned from another museum. It takes a long time to do things. Then we've also had to change the nature of the job. So I now have a curator of art and climate change. I have a curator of cultural empowerment. I have a curator of transhistorical narrative.
Oh.
So I have these different roles.
These are the best jobs.
Yeah, they are
titles in the world.
They are. And so the idea is that the nature of the museum role has to change to tie in with the different way of doing the programming.
You're just giving these rich rooms and spaces for discourse and conversation. It's to the nth degree. Giving spaces for conversations and feedback loops and back and forth is fabulous.
And really importantly, completely politically diverse. So like any human being is interested in the same questions. So we'll get every type of political spectrum coming in as visitors, and everyone's interested in the question. And what I want is for people from totally different perspectives to chat amongst each other.
Lovely.
And so we've had everyone from like hardcore, like Norfolk farmers, never seen an artwork in their life, getting involved.
That's cool.
I like the idea that in society there are fewer and fewer spaces where you can actually genuinely meet other ideas. And museums can be that, both from around the world, but also amongst each other, and then explore those questions and get to meet people you wouldn't normally meet, in your life. And that's good.
And the idea that art speaks to you in the way that you're describing today is something I'm finding so compelling. What can we look forward to next?
So we've currently got on What is the Meaning of Life? So we've got that 6 months up until November. We've got a series of amazing shows exploring that question that people will love. And then we open in November, How Do We Find Love? And in that, we've got a whole series of great shows. My favourite probably is the Last Human Kiss. So it's looking at the kiss cross-culturally and across time about how humans have that moment before you kiss someone where you find that essence of vulnerability. And so it's exploring the essence of humanity, really, which is what we're all about at the Sainsbury Centre, is basically getting people to meet art in a fundamentally different way, to explore the biggest questions they've got in their lives and do it in a safe and enjoyable way.
What an incredible way to wrap. I'm 100% coming for that. Thank you so much for coming in, Jago.
Thanks, James. Great.
If you enjoyed this week's show, please follow us on Instagram at StoryCo Pod. Subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Trust me, it really does help. StoryCo is a Telltale Industries production. It's recorded in Studio One at the brilliant TYX Studios here in King's Cross. It's produced by Jago Lee, assistant produced by Nellie Batt. Special thanks to Craig Hepsinstall, Jack Freegard, Tyler Newton, Issa Gibson. I'm James Kirkham. This has been a masterclass in how storytelling pays in this modern media landscape. Go out, tell a story that matters, and we'll see you next week.